Welcome to They Live by Film, a platform dedicated to bringing you film discussion and interviews from around the world. I'm Adam Lundy, and today I'm just joined by Zach Bryant. We're going to bring you a bit of a special preview episode here today without Chris, because Chris is away on a trip and he can't go to the theaters right now. But me and Zach said, you know, there's this phenomenon that people have been talking about for the last few weeks and months called Barbenheimer slash Barbieheimer, whatever way you prefer to say it. We were both going to be seeing it opening weekend, so it made sense for us to come and talk about it, in case you listeners are interested to hear our thoughts on such new films, which is something we don't really get to talk about on the podcast a whole lot, especially, in the same depth that we talk about films normally. So me and Zach thought it'd be cool to come on and sort of talk about these two movies and give a little bit of a review. Don't worry, they will be spoiler free. But before I go on too long, I've talked too much. Zach, hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very well. I got out of Barbie about 3 hours ago. Double featured them both today, and you obviously did yours yesterday on
Mhm.
opening day, which is cool. Was it busy?
Oh my God, dude! We bought our tickets for Oppenheimer like 2 weeks ago, like about when they opened here for Regal, and it had like 6 or 7 people in it. I was like, yeah, that's what I would have expected. We walked in yesterday to a packed theater, completely packed for IMAX, and it was at like 10:40 in the morning.
It's crazy.
Yeah, so people were there, and I mean Barbie was also packed. I mean, both of them were. And it was interesting for me because obviously for Oppenheimer, it's a very testosterone filled,
Yeah,
theater.
it's Chris
And
Nolan.
I
Yeah,
was,
it's masculine.
yeah. And I went into Barbie and I was the only male in the whole row that we were on.
I've kind of a similar experience with Barbie. Oppenheimer is a little bit different for us. We went at 11 a.m. this morning, and it wasn't empty, but it definitely wasn't full. I'd say if I would had to guess, I'd say there was about 12 other people there in the theater with us. I was really confused when I first walked in. I went into the screen, and me and Neve walked in, and the only other people in the sort of waiting for the film to start, which was about 20 minutes early, which is about right for what we normally do, to like just chill out in the seats
Mhm.
and just talk and stuff. Um, Up near the front, there was an older gentleman and two very small children, and I was like,
These kids are
"What?"
going to be so bored.
Well, I was less worried about the boredom. I'm more worried about the what I had heard about regarding sex scenes. So I was like, okay, that's a bit weird. Maybe we're in the wrong theater. There's kids films showing at this time of day. Like I think Elemental, is out at the moment. And in fact, I realized there was an Elemental cardboard cutout outside that screen that we were in. It's like, oh crap, maybe there was a mistake on the e-ticket that I had booked. Maybe we're in the wrong place. So I went out to the lobby. I was like, hey, I just want to make sure Oppenheimer is in screen five. And they're like, yeah, screen five. Is like, all right. Because like there's a dude in there with like two really small kid. Like, I would say these kids are like four. And I was like, this film has like graphic sex scenes. They shouldn't really be in this screening. And they were like, oh yeah, no shit, they definitely shouldn't. Let me go in. So I went off to the toilet and I came back, and by the time I'd come back, someone was going in kind of behind me, and they ask the gentleman is like, "Hey, what are you here to see?" And the guy goes, "Oh, Elemental." I'm like, "Yeah, you're in the wrong theater, dude. Come with me." So yeah, luckily they were in the wrong place. Luckily, this man was not bringing two 4-year-olds to see Oppenheimer. That would have been quite the experience. But Barbie was packed. Nearly the whole theater was packed out. Um, mainly women and girls. Like you said, I'd say I definitely wasn't the only guy. There was a few other men who were dragged by their wives and girlfriends. I was probably the only enthusiastic man there, at least before the film started, because I was super looking forward to it. But the whole theater, I'm sure yours was the same. Tons of laughter. It seemed as though the vibes, were really good as soon as the film started. But yeah, definitely at an empty nearly an empty screen for Oppenheimer, but a very very full screen for Barbie.
One of the most interesting parts with my experience with both of those, especially Oppenheimer, was, of course, we're not going to spoil anything, even though, I
Yeah,
mean, this is a historical event. I don't know if there's
yeah.
much to spoil just in
Spoilers
case.
for World War II coming up.
uh, but, we got to the end, and credit to being in a full theater, everyone was dead silent during the entire film. I
Mm.
think there was like one joke that people kind of laughed at, but it was just like there was almost like this sense of sorrow at the very end. And it took like a second because here we actually for some reason clap during movies. It started, but it almost felt like weirdly hollow. It's like, should we clap? We just kind of got some depressing like dread here. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's like I that's kind of like I honestly I the reason I don't go to the theater much these days is because people just have no fucking manners. I genuinely don't like going to the theater because I get very easily distracted by other people doing annoying things. Someone two rows down opening their phone to check a message, and people eating their popcorn too loud. All that kind of stuff just really grates me. So I have a tough time. So I was worried, going to see these movies because I think I'd mentioned to you in Discord that my theater doesn't have the best sound. It can
mhm.
be a little bit quiet, especially like when we saw Mission Impossible, last week or whenever that was. Um, it's not the loudest theater, but what I realized when I got in there, because I don't go in there too regularly, I don't know all the details of the building. But what I realized when we went in there, because when we were going into our screen, I saw the Dolby Digital sign on our screen. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't even realize they had Dolby Digital because I'm normally in like one of the other screens that don't have it. So the film was so loud. I was so happy when it started, and everything was so loud. And it was the same with Barbie later on. We were in another screen that had Dolby. So that was super loud as well because it just really helped me try and sort of keep engaged with the films. That's a real trouble I have in the theater. When the sound is a bit low, I get so distracted by other people and I kind of lose that immersiveness. But you know, having that Dolby sound so clear, so loud, so crisp, it just really helps, especially like with Oppenheimer. We're talking, and I suppose we might as well get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. We'll start talking about Oppenheimer, and then we'll touch on Barbie later. But when it comes to Oppenheimer, it's such a it's a film that's so grounded, especially compared to other Chris Nolan movies. I'm going to talk about my experience with Tenet, which I watched yesterday because I hadn't actually seen it. I'm going to talk about my experience with that a little bit later. But when you have a film that is essentially people talking in rooms for 3 hours, it can be hard to stay engaged. But when you have that really sort of loud, condensed, crisp sound, and I will say, and you mentioned this yesterday in our Discord, that the sound design was impeccable, and I 100% agree with you. This, like, for all the complaints that people had about Tenet, which I personally didn't really get when I watched it yesterday, but that's another thing. Yeah, but for all the complaints people had about the sound design in Tenet, it's like Chris Nolan took that to heart and said, "Well, fuck you, I'm gonna make this the best sounding movie you've ever heard in your lives," to try and make up for that.
Yeah, and it's hard not to talk about like the one where it really made me realize like how great the sound was of course I guess I'll call it the money shot of the movie. The reason a lot of people showed up to see it,
Mm,
and it's and as much as it is great to talk about like the use of sound in the film, it's a very silent, even though it's talky and there is a lot of great sound. It was interesting to me to see how quiet he could be when he needed to be. Like
yeah.
that part when we see the big effect shot and you're thinking, I mean, it's in like dead silence, and when the sound comes back it's just it just works so well. But yeah, I had no complaints about the sound at all. Like, and I've heard people in reviews have apparently complained about the sound, and I'm just like, is it just because it's a Chris Nolan film? Because I didn't have any issues in my IMAX theater with it.
Well, one thing I'm maybe wondering about when it comes to the sound, because we know from how Chris Nolan works, with his last how many other films he does this with. All of his films are so thoroughly researched,
Mhm.
from a scientific point of view. You look at all the research he did in Interstellar to try and make these theories as scientifically viable as possible, when it comes to making the movie. We know how well researched he is and how accurate he likes to be with his science. And one thing that surprised me quite sort of early in the film, and this isn't really a spoiler because, in a film about making a big bomb, they test out smaller bombs.
Yeah.
It's not a spoiler. So when they're sort of testing some of the smaller bombs, kind of, towards the start of the film, he gets that light versus sound, speed perfect because when his the first sort of little bomb goes off and they're only kind of standing a few feet away, it goes off, and then a split second later, then you hear the sound, and it looked weird at first because I was like, I don't usually see that in movies because normally they just kind of edit it so that everything goes together. Um, but obviously that's not
That's
how
not
it would
how
work in real life
combustions work.
because
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, because you see it because the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound, so you're going to see it before you hear it. And I thought that was super interesting, and obviously that continues on kind of throughout with the different tests and stuff like that. So maybe I'm wondering if that's what people are complaining about, that he's actually showing things as they would look in real life, that they're scientifically accurate. Because I don't think I've ever seen a film really do that. With smaller scale explosions. I mean, when fucking John McClane blows up a helicopter or some shit, you hear it and see it at the same time. I've never seen an explosion in a film look scientifically accurate the way that those are, throughout the movie. Really, it surprised me. I was kind of taken aback for a second. I was like, wow, that's actually really interesting that he would do that, that he would kind of take that chance with the audience.
And I mean, I think it comes down to where Nolan is so hands-on with whatever he does. We talk about blockbuster directors, we talk about auteur directors, and Nolan is in that weird space where he's kind of both in a sense. Like he's so hands-on with everything he does, and it feels very thoughtful. Like I think we both have given Nolan a hard time at times,
Yeah.
and I think for good reason. But the dude knows what he wants, and I don't think people's complaints necessarily bother him, because at the end of the day, he's been very adamant about, I do things the way I want to do them, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, like my main complaint with Nolan, kind of, that when we've had these sort of talks and discussions and stuff, my main complaint, and this is where I'll kind of tie in Tenet, I suppose, has always been that he's a man that's very married to his concept, almost to a fault. So he has these great ideas. He's such an intelligent guy. He's a very well-read man. He knows a lot about a lot of things. He's a very, very smart guy. And he kind of loses a bit of plot and a bit of heart and a bit of character when he comes up with these really high concept ideas, because he's so invested in the concept that he doesn't want to bend the concept to fit a plot. And that was my experience when I watched Tenet yesterday. Tenet was the first time in over 10 years that I hadn't seen a Chris Nolan film in the theater. I've told you guys the story before that, like, the whole reason I love film and talk about film is because of Inception. So, I have all the time in the world for Chris Nolan. Even if I do give him a hard time sometimes, I do have all the time in the world for him, because, I'm in this position because Inception exists. And Inception was kind of the slope that led to this kind of, this, becoming really married to concepts. And Tenet was exactly that experience, where he had this insane concept that I don't even really, I don't understand what was going on in half of that movie. It's too highbrow for me. It's just, I'm not smart enough to get the concepts that he's putting down. But there's also not enough meat and bones, in terms of character and plot, that I really give a shit about what's going down. The main character is called the protagonist. He doesn't even give his character a name. That's how little he cares about him, because he's just a pawn to this concept. So what's brilliant about Oppenheimer is that it is just the complete opposite of that. This is the story of a man, a character, and how his actions define other characters around him. They either admire him, they adore him, they love him, they hate him, they're jealous of him. It's all character. Yeah, there's obviously the basic plot of, we're going to try and develop this bomb for the US Army, and there's obviously some repercussions on that based on, people that he's friends with and political stuff, blah blah blah. But none of that really matters, because this film is just a character study of a flawed individual, someone who exists in a kind of dichotomy that he, loves his country. He wants to do good things for his country, but he's aware of the terrible repercussions, and he's kind of at odds with himself throughout this whole time, that he doesn't really fit the mold of one person, if that makes sense. I suppose I don't want to kind of waffle too much, but like if we take the basic idea of where we see him at the start of the movie, he's someone who is happy to work for his country and do his part in the war, but also at the same time he hangs out with communists. So he represents kind of both sides of things in a way, and that gives him layers and flaws, and it makes how other characters deal with him difficult because they also might like him or admire him, but then he'll do something that annoys them or frustrates him and makes their job harder. We look at how Matt Damon's character deals with him throughout the movie, the general. This is someone who clearly admires Oppenheimer, but is very frustrated by the fact that he won't just follow basic security procedure. So, he's at odds with him throughout the movie because of that. So that's to kind of wrap up what I'm saying here. This is in terms of like building characters, this is the best sort of script Nolan has done since probably The Prestige. Just purely from
100%.
a character point of view. Like that's like The Prestige is probably the last time I really gave a shit about the characters he was writing. Um, and it's because he doesn't. There's no concept. There's no gimmick with Oppenheimer. With Tenet, it was the whole going backwards through time. With Interstellar, it was the whole moving the other timey wimey stuff. With Inception, it was the dreams within dreams. With Dunkirk, it was the same. The same sort of hour over and over again from different characters' point of view. There's always a gimmick, but with Oppenheimer, there is no gimmick. This is just a man, and we are going to tell you the story of this man and all the sort of all the just the little things that he does or says and how they can have massive implications for other people around him. And I love that.
I know. And it's a weird concept too, because you talk about like a lot of the gimmicks he does, but when they announced he was going to do an Oppenheimer film, I really couldn't think of a better director to do that type of story. For some reason, it just fit him so perfectly. If there's going to be one person talks about, and I think that kind of goes back to where you're talking about like him married to a concept, and it, part of that I see in like his characterization of like Oppenheimer as a person, where his mind is set to making this bomb or doing what he feels is necessary, and then the weight of that concept comes down on him hard, which is a big part of the film later. But it's a guy who is just so single-minded on certain elements that sometimes he misses the big picture of what's really happening. And I think that's maybe why I feel like Nolan did so well with this type of character.
That's a really good point. They are very similar just in terms of how their minds work. That's a really, really good point. I didn't even consider that. Now, obviously, we're not saying Chris Nolan is here inventing the A-bombs, but um, yeah, that's such a good point in terms of just how their thought processes work, and working with other people and things like that. I could definitely see some parallels there. In terms of I didn't do too much background reading as to why Chris Nolan was interested in doing this film. I don't know if you had done any background reading on that.
I
Clearly, he's
did,
been
and it's kind of funny. Robert
okay.
Pattinson is the thank for that. Apparently, he gave
Okay.
Nolan the book American Prometheus, which is the book about Oppenheimer, and he loved it and ended up making the movie. So that was his next interest after Tenet.
Was that when they were? Yeah, was that when they were filming Tenet? Because he actually name drops Oppenheimer in Tenet. Um, that Oppenheimer is
Supposedly, yeah. From my
mentioned.
understanding, it was while they were filming, and I don't know if he added that to the script later or just maybe Pattinson saw the name and said, "Hey, you might like this book if you haven't read it." I'm not sure which one, but yeah, apparently that's how it came about.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
Which,
'Cause-
talk about the Prometheus thing. I just want to know like how, like, I already knew I was gonna like. Like I said, I've had my issues with certain things Nolan's done, but I'm always excited to see his movies. But I felt very comfortable the moment like the movie starts and it has like all this flame and stuff, and then it has like the words that are like Prometheus gave the world fire, he was chained for his offense or something like that, and I'm like, that's a pretty metal way to start this movie. But I feel like it may be a disservice, as much as we can talk about the technicals of Nolan, to not bring up the ridiculous cast in this movie.
It's insane. The cast is stupid. It's just
Like, I
like
almost don't want to name everyone because I was just like, as I was watching, I was like, Jesus, they're in this movie too.
we'll be here
Like,
all day. I'm sure we can just pick up a few that were maybe surprises, but we would be here all like literally like nearly every scene. There's like a new person. Like, hey, I know that person, and then like you never see them again for the rest of the film. Like, oh, okay.
and
It's
it has to say a lot about Nolan, like just how
yeah.
desperate people are to work for him.
That's exactly what I was thinking as well. It's almost like when Tarantino does those big sort of those ensemble casts that people will kind of jump on even if it's a small role, because they want to work with him. Um, so it was literally like this because nearly sort of every like some like the cast is full of a lot of like up and comer actors as well, a lot of young people who are trying to obviously sort of widen their net and stuff like that. But then there's also a good few of the kind of old boys who kind of show up, you know, just to kind of name drop a few people that kind of just shown up out of nowhere that I didn't anticipate to be in the film. Josh Hartnett, was not expecting
Yeah.
Josh Hartnett to show up. Uh, you know, we talked about Gary Oldman before we started recording.
Hmm.
Gary Oldman as President Truman. That was a surprise. I didn't even recognize him for a moment, and then I sort of
As one of
recognized
the
it.
Safdie brothers too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Benny
Yeah.
Safdie. He is Teller, so he's the guy who that testifies as part of that kind of weird trial that he wanted to make the H bomb. So he was in it. Casey Affleck showed up as well, which I thought was weird. 'Cause I'm pretty sure Casey Affleck was cancelled, but maybe not anymore.
It's
So
like
it's
they were like, well, we have to get an Affleck. Matt Damon's in this movie. So which one do we pick?
Ben's busy.
Ben was unavailable.
Yeah. There was one thing I noticed. Again, I suppose the other one I'll give a shout out to because it was definitely the most random. Josh Peck from Drake and Josh fame was one of the scientists handpicked for Trinity. That was definitely the most random one. But it's nearly every scene has somebody different. And one thing when I was looking through the cast, like when they first started showing up, and then I kind of had to think about it, and it kind of makes sense for the context of the film we're making here, in not in a literal sense, but there's a lot of people involved in this cast that have you know touched on horror. There's some horror actors in here, or actors that have at least been in horror movies. Obviously,
Mhm.
Killian Murphy obviously was in 28 Days Later. Emily Blunt was in the Quiet Place movies. I think the second one even had Killian Murphy in it as well. I don't know. I haven't seen
Yeah.
either. Yeah, Florence Pugh obviously.
Jack Arnold from the Halloween movies, the new ones. He's in it.
Yeah, I was going to mention. You mean
Yeah.
Dylan Arnold?
Is it Dylan Arnold?
Yeah, Dylan
Yeah, it's Dylan
Arnold.
Arnold. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dylan Arnold. Yeah, from the new Halloween movies, of course. Florence Pugh. Um, your boy Dane DeHaan from Cure to Wellness showed
Yeah, he's
up.
in there. It's such an
Uh,
asshole character.
yeah, he's such an asshole face. Alex Wolff, from Hereditary. Jack Quaid from Scream 5. There was just so many actors that were showing up, and like some of these guys have been in horror movies. Jason Clarke as well, the guy who's kind of not in, who's kind of like cross-examining Oppenheimer during his trial. He's in the Pet Cemetery, the Pet Cemetery movie that
Mhm.
came out a few years ago. So like, there's so many actors in here that have kind of been in horror movies, or at least that I sort of know them best for their horror roles, at least. Um, that obviously it's not a horror movie by any sense, but like there is some moments in this film that are very horror adjacent, which I think you would agree with. There's that particular scene um, that where Killian Murphy Oppenheimer is given a speech, and things kind of go a bit surreal, and definitely sort of dipped our toes in horror. So maybe I'm not surprised at some of the cast, but like some of the names I mentioned are literally in like one scene. Like, like we're talking about Jack Quaid, like he's such um a hot product in Hollywood the last few years, especially since I think The Boys is his show that he
Mhm.
kind of broke out with. Obviously he's Dennis Quaid's son, so he's the Nepo baby, he's gonna break out eventually, but whatever. But he like literally shows up. He's in like 3 scenes and has like a total like one line. Or the person that you mentioned before we started recording, Remy Malek is in this movie, and he does have a very important role, but like it's like 2 minutes long. So
Yeah,
it's
it's like weird. You would never think. Like I'm trying to think of an Oscar winner from the last few years who would be like okay with playing like not a main character. Because I mean, he could have been Jack Taylor's role. He could have been anyone's role, but he was
hmm,
like he's this role. It's Jack Hill, I think, is the character name,
yeah, something like that.
and it's like 3 scenes, and it's probably he probably says 25 words or probably more than that in the one scene, but like it's not much.
No,
But for an Oscar winner to be able to do that, I think that's cool. Like I think that's just really neat to see.
yeah, it shows that we can even after maybe lukewarm reception of Tenet, it just shows that Nolan is just hot shit. People want to work with him because he's one of the few filmmakers that, like you said earlier, you know, can make blockbusters, can go out and, make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office while still making interesting and intellectually engaging films. There's not a lot of people who do that, who can do that anyway, where, a studio will trust him with such a huge, huge budget, and,
I mean,
and
think
knowing that
about
they're
the
going to
type of
get the
movie.
return.
Yeah, I mean, think about the like take this movie away from Nolan, like just separate him from this. It is a 3 hour biopic film where the majority of the film is a lot of talking that it has a significant amount of the movie in black and white, and it is killing it in the box office. Like
Hmm.
that's insanity to me. Like that's awesome. I'm glad, but it's just like it's not the type of film you would expect audiences to flock to, and I'm really glad that they are.
Yeah, it's the power of the name, and the auteur is not dead. We talk about the theaters and the box office being taken over by by superhero movies and things like that. You know, and you have people like Scorsese who complain that real cinema is dead and all that crap. Oppenheimer proves that's not the case. If you can make something that's truly engaging and it's marketed right and you have the right people behind it, you can get people into the theater to see your 3 hour biopic that's mainly talking in courtrooms. This it should not, in all, going by recent trends of box office, this film shouldn't get anywhere near $1 billion, let alone $500 million. But I'll be surprised if it doesn't get at least halfway between the two. All things considered.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think it's a movie too where it's taken up so many premium screens. It was the same problem, like it's a weird comparison, but Avatar 2 had where the limit of some of its weekends was simply by there weren't enough premium screens
Mm.
to, and there'd be people who would be buying tickets 2 or 3 weeks out just to see it in IMAX or see it in Dolby Atmos or something like that, and that keeps the movie rolling for weeks because of it, because people want to see it, but they'd rather just wait for, which I recommend. If you have an IMAX, go see it in IMAX. Even though that's like 98% talking, it's worth seeing in IMAX.
Yeah, but like obviously we didn't like we don't have IMAX in our local theater, but like I could tell, like, and I was saying this to Neve, just before the film started, I was telling her, 'cause she'd asked, like, she had read something about this being filmed in a particular format, and I said, yeah, like realistically, you'd want to watch this in IMAX. She's like, oh, would that be much bigger than our screen that we're watching it on here? And I said, yeah, it would literally be like twice the length and twice the height of what we're watching it on. And she was like, whoa, that's big. So and it would have looked phenomenal. I'm just not lucky enough to have one of those, anywhere near me. I would love to see it on that, but it still looked great on a normal screen. So if you don't have an IMAX and you said, screw it, I'm not going to go watch it because I don't have IMAX and Zach told me to watch it in IMAX, then you can also take my advice where it still looked incredible, even not on IMAX. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, I'm gonna go see it again, and probably not in IMAX, but
yeah.
if you can, definitely do it.
Oh, yeah, like that would be my preference, absolutely. If I had that option, I would have 100% did it. Um, we mentioned, Oscars earlier with Rami Malek. I know we're only halfway through the year and the Oscar bait movies don't normally come out till nearer to Christmas time, but you know, could we finally see Chris Nolan win Best Director?
The only and it's hard to predict like the Oscars because every time I'm like, this seems like a shoe-in. The Oscars do the exact opposite. But to me, in my opinion, I think the only thing that might stand in his way is Scorsese. But Scorsese has had his trouble getting Oscars as well. Like he's only got the one, and it's for the most random movie he has. So it's I would say they have to be the top two front runners though, and I think
Yeah.
Cillian Murphy right now is the front runner for Best Actor.
Yeah, I totally forgot about Killers of the Flower Moon. That will definitely go toe to toe. I suppose the only thing that might be in its favor is that this is probably, in terms of like if we talk about the concept of Oscar bait, this probably is closer to Oscar bait than Killers of the Flower Moon. I know they're both technically biopics, but I feel like they usually go for more character driven stuff. And from what I've read about Killers of the Flower Moon, although it's obviously character driven, it's going to be much more driven by its plot and its politics. But it's probably up for an interesting race, and you never know. There could be another film that comes out, closer to Christmas and blows everybody away. We won't really know that. It's very, very early prediction, but like, if he doesn't get nominated, that there's just obviously something wrong.
Yeah, because I don't. I think this is one of these movies. I think a director gets a handful of movies that define him. I think this will have to be one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, The Dark Knight and Inception will define him as well, but like, I don't see this not being a movie people don't discuss about him.
Yeah, like The Dark Knight and Inception, they're always going to be the commercial, like, from a commercial point of view. Those are the ones that like everybody has seen, everybody knows about, everybody talks about, especially the Dark Knight. It's just it's one of those films that'll just last forever, just in terms of how it affected the zeitgeist. But like Oppenheimer, it's probably it's probably his most mature film. As a filmmaker, it's probably his most mature film. So maybe it won't have that longevity from a commercial point of view. In terms of general audiences, may not talk about Oppenheimer as much in 10 years as people still talk about The Dark Knight now, 15 years after it came out. It might not have the same legs from that point of view, but I think from an artistic standpoint and in film circles, like Oppenheimer is just a huge achievement. It's a real kind of watershed moment for Nolan as a filmmaker. And he's had a few of those in his career. We think about I'll sort of mention Insomnia briefly. Like, I'm not a big fan of Insomnia. I think it's kind of okay, but it's a watershed moment in that this was his he kind of had to do this movie so that he could do Batman. That was kind of his stepping stone into the world of sort of commercial Hollywood cinema. And then Inception would be his next watershed because he kind of broke the mold in terms of making smart blockbusters. And then this is his next watershed moment, that he is proving that he's not a one-trick pony, where he's not this guy who has to have something, a concept, otherwise he has nothing. He has no film, basically. Because if you take the concept away from Tenet, there's no movie there. There's very little plot. It's all concept. So by doing Oppenheimer, by writing and directing this film that's so mature, it kind of proves to the doubters, the people like me, who thought he couldn't do a film like this and make it interesting. And he proved me wrong. And I'm so glad he did, because like I said before, I'm so indebted to him as a filmmaker in terms of my love of film. I'm glad that he was able to make a movie like this. And now I'm super excited to see what he can do next, because he's proven now that he can write characters and plot and not have to have a concept to make it interesting.
And I kind of just before we end up having to move on and talking about like as an achievement, this has to be like up there with like Spencer and Social Network as like great biopics, like how you do a biopic correctly. Like if you give this movie to another director, I feel like their whole point is, okay, we need to end the movie. Either they're going to do two things. Either they're going to end the movie with the bomb, or they're going to end the movie right before the bomb. And what I like is, Nolan wants to do analogy to the atomic bomb, wants to do the after effects, wants to do the damage afterwards. So that happens.
Yeah.
What would you say? Maybe a little over the halfway point.
It was about that, yeah.
The
It was hard to
yeah,
time, but yeah, I would have said it was around maybe the hour 45, maybe 2 hour mark.
yeah, and I mean that he's going to show you the big money shot there, and and his gamble is you were still going to be invested,
Hmm.
which I think says a lot about the confidence there. Like, because a lot of directors like, this is what people are here for, and then goes around and almost makes you feel bad about it, like makes you feel a little bit of guilt for almost being there for that reason.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. And I didn't clock that analogy of like the nuclear bomb. There's obviously that after effect, that affects, people for years and years and years afterwards. And like you said, Oppenheimer does the same. It hangs around for a few years after the initial Trinity tests to kind of show you how that affected both him and the people he worked with, and his family and stuff like that. So that's a really great point. I did not clock that because I was wondering, when we were watching this, like, are we coming to an end here? We've seen what we need to see. How are we going to wrap this up? So now that you've said that, it just makes total sense why we hung around for so long afterwards. Because like you said, we were watching the fallout basically.
And to me, like as much as it'd be interesting to end with the Trinity test or whatever. Honestly, that like in line that the conversation he has with the character where they like talk about the whole film, like what did he say to him, and you get to hear it. It's such a gut punch. Like that is
Yeah,
such a great way to end a movie because it is such a gut punch, and it
yeah.
makes you feel like really hollow. And then it's
I
it. That's the movie.
I read a review that likened that moment to Rosebud in Citizen Kane, and I thought
Oh, that's great.
that's such a great, way of looking at it. It's just it makes you see the rest of the film so different. It makes you understand the character so differently once you kind of know that part. So I thought that
And,
was a really great, really great shout out.
yeah, and I think it sums up him because the hardest thing with biopics, and I mean we've seen it over and over again. We could talk about Rami Malek, but biopics always have this issue where they want to take a singular look at a complex person. All people are complex, but I mean, you take someone like J. Robert Oppenheimer, who dealt with a lot, who changed his views, who we don't quite fully understand. But what I liked about this film is it gave you a lot of perspectives from different characters. You have one character who's sitting there talking about he's a manipulator. He wants people to feel sorry for him. And there's evidence in the movie where you could still make that determination, even if it is on his side a little bit more, which I thought was so important. Like to really bring out how complex he was, not only to himself, but to the people around him.
Hmm.
And, I think, because I mean, that was always my issue with a lot of biopics is it's like Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, it takes such a singular view of Freddie Mercury that makes it very uninteresting. As
Yeah,
someone who should be way more interesting.
yeah, I generally hate biopics. I just don't like them because usually when I watch them, I'm like, this could have just been a documentary. Why are we watching these people pretend to be other people? Just show me a
Yeah.
documentary instead. I would much prefer watch a documentary than a biopic 99 times out of 100. But when you do it in a creative way that's interesting, there's like you said earlier, there's a few biopics that do this. Obviously, this definitely one of them. Rocket Man, as the antithesis to Bohemian Rhapsody, Rocket Man is super interesting. Um, you mentioned Social Network is probably that's like the that's what you aim for when it comes to like great biopics. Like Social Network is like that's like the one that you want to aim for, in terms of quality. Um, and then Spencer, which I love Spencer, but I don't think we can really call it a biopic. It is biopic in the loosest possible
Not
terms,
traditional, yeah.
not a traditional biopic. But I love Spencer. But my wife, who loves Princess Diana, would, or she hates that movie. So um, it's definitely
See,
not for everybody.
yeah, and I think, yeah, because I agree with you on the documentary thing, and I think it's because so many of them feel like these are the events that happened in their life. Here is the Wikipedia bullet points.
Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
I want the essence of the person. I want to know who that person is. I want like a look inside of them, and I feel like Spencer does that. A
Mhm,
lot of those events didn't happen, but I feel like I had a better understanding of Princess Diana as a person. Whereas in this
mhm.
one, I feel like I understand someone who was obviously very particular, very interesting, and maybe even a little to him, very to himself in a lot of ways.
100%,
And I think
100%
that's what
agree.
makes a good biopic versus a documentary.
Could not agree more. Absolutely. If more biopics were like Oppenheimer, then I would be first in line to see all of them. So uh, can definitely agree. Any final thoughts on Oppenheimer before we jump over to Barbie Land?
No, I guess we should move on to Barbie because I don't want to take any time away from people who might
No.
be more interested in that.
Yeah, well, look, the whole reason we're doing this is because of the Barbenheimer phenomenon, which is so interesting. From what and maybe you can correct me on this because I think you know maybe a bit more about this than I did. But my understanding of Barbenheimer, where this kind of came from, the whole reason that Barbie came out on the same date as Oppenheimer was kind of a slight to Chris Nolan because obviously he left Warner Brothers, who were distributing Barbie. Am I right in saying that? Is that something that you know about?
Yeah, so kind of my understanding, and I'm sure some of this is speculatory. Of course, I don't think Warner Brothers is going to straight out say this is the
Yeah,
reason,
of
but this
course.
seems to be the most likely. Is of course they had a big falling out with Tenet because they put it on HBO Max, and he was upset about that. And then he went over to, of course, there was a bidding war for him. Universal got him,
Mhm.
and he decided they were going to release Oppenheimer on July 21st, 2023. And conveniently, a few weeks after that, it was announced that Barbie was going to, distributed by Warner Brothers, was going to release the same day. Almost
Mhm.
as like this weird attempt to try and limit what he could do, like
Yeah.
on his first feature with another studio.
Yeah, this makes take some of the box office away, and it kind of ended up. I want to
The
say blowing
opposite.
up in their face, but it kind of worked out for everybody in the end because now you have people like me and you who have just done a double feature of polar opposite movies. And I saw a meme during the week that apparently 15 years ago, Mamma Mia and The Dark Knight also came out on the same date, and it was the Dark Mama walked so that Barbieheimer could run. I thought that was very funny, but yeah, it kind of proves the power of the internet. There's no logical reason at all why one would double feature Oppenheimer and Barbie, but because the internet said that would be a fun, cool thing to do, millions of people are doing it, like us and like other people. So very, very strange, interesting phenomenon. It only comes around, once in a while. These kind of, this is something that it shouldn't feel like it was a cinematic event, but this was built up for weeks and weeks and weeks. Like it was kind of like, waiting for Avengers Endgame to drop, after waiting the year for Infinity War. It felt like this huge event that, we were building up for weeks and weeks, even though, we're watching two films that normally would have had, good, box office success, but are absolutely going to be boosted by the memes, basically. The memes won. So I just this whole phenomenon kind of building up to Barbieheimer has been really, really interesting. But we'll talk about Barbieheimer. It was a few years in development. I don't know if Greta Gerwig was involved the whole way through development. I know this was originally slated to star Amy Schumer quite a few years ago, and then that that part of the project fell apart, and then this new version kind of came, which was obviously with Margot Robbie now in the title in the titular role of Barbie. Um, Greta Gerwig, I don't
I
know
think
if you
Diablo Cody was
Diablo
at
Cody,
one point. Diablo Cody was like involved. The girl who wrote Juno and Jennifer's
Juno.
Body.
Interesting. Okay, so it seems like
Yeah,
this must have passed through a few hands. Um, I didn't actually realize for a while that, that Greta Gerwig was involved, and that her husband Noah Baumbach was involved, who co-wrote the script with her. I didn't realize for a while that they were involved. When this first kind of got announced, I was like, "Oh, weird! They're making a Barbie movie. That sounds fun." And then once the Barbieheimer stuff started a few months ago, and I read that Greta Gerwig was directing it, I was immediately intrigued. We've had this conversation kind of off recording, that I really like Little Women, and you don't like Little Women. But I'm generally a Greta Gerwig fan. pretty much, and you probably had the same trajectory with her, that you probably saw her first in the House of the Devil. Would I be
Yes,
saying that
yes.
right? Yeah.
And I saw Lady Bird or probably around the same time, which I love that movie. So
Oh,
'cause
okay,
I do
yeah.
like one of her. I do love Lady Bird.
And I haven't seen Lady Bird. I need to get around to seeing it because obviously Saoirse Ronan, I need to rep Homegirl. But yeah, I especially didn't realize that Noah was involved. So once I saw that they were writing it together, that it wasn't just like a script that was handed to Greta to try and make something out of. That really started piquing my interest. And obviously the trailer dropped, the first teaser trailer that 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 basically ripped off 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I was so surprised when the film actually opened with that. If your film has the balls to start a Barbie movie by riffing on 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's just genius. The we talked about the script with Oppenheimer, but the Barbie script is just as brilliant in different ways. Oppenheimer is a very smart intellectual script, and Barbie is just as smart, but it's so funny. It's just one of the best scripts, and it's honestly one of the best times I've had in the theater in a long time. I really, really, really had a great time with this movie. It was so fun. Um, I wasn't expecting some of the turns with the plot and some of the themes that come up in this movie. I wasn't expecting it. Going by the trailer, I just expected just to be a frolic through Barbie Land, and they'd be in the real world for a little while, and they'd have to try and figure out a way back to Barbie Land. That's what I was kind of expecting from this film. Just kind of like a fish out of water story, and they have to, Barbie
Mhm.
and Ken have to try and figure out a way back. I wasn't expecting them to touch on some of the stuff that they were with, like, feminism. I probably should have expected the feminism, but like the patriarchy, incel culture, um, consumerism, capitalism, all this kind of other, and now obviously you have the the existentialism as well. All
Sure.
these really sort of big themes are kind of thrown at you, while also making really good jokes and having fun music and really popping pastel sets. It's just I just thought it was genius. I thought it was just such a fun but so smart as well. And it works on so many different levels. Like my theater, I don't know if it was the same for you, but it was filled from people like just little kids all the way up to like people in their 50s. And I felt like there was jokes for everybody the whole way through.
Yeah, there was a woman there who I overheard her talking. She was in the same room as me. She was talking to somebody else, like, "Yeah, this is going to be her first movie," and I'm like, "That's sweet. That's a nice experience to have." Yeah. So there was a lot of good stuff like that. I will say the best joke of the movie. I won't spoil it, but you'll know which one I'm talking about. It's in the third act of the film where the narrator pops back in for a minute. That
Yes.
probably got the biggest laugh in the theater.
So good. This is what I mean. The script, no, that's personally my second favorite joke. My second favorite joke is in the very last scene of this movie. That's my favorite joke is in the very last scene of this movie. But the one that you're referring to is also very, very brilliant. There's so much great meta commentary in this movie. You know, apart from just the smart jokes and wordplay and stuff. There's so much great commentary. Um, I kind of want to hear your take on the Justice League joke. With you being a Zack Snyder stan.
I mean, I think the movie took a lot of things that if you're kind of a film nerd, you're gonna not necessarily take to heart, but you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like the Godfather thing, I was like, yeah,
Yeah, that
that's
was good
about
as
right.
well.
So you're like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, like you can tell that this is written by people. Like again, Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach. They're two really smart. They're two really smart people. They've written some of the best scripts in Hollywood in the last 20 years. Like Noah Baumbach has co-written so many of Wes Anderson's scripts. He knows his stuff. Greta's a great filmmaker. In terms of like films that come out in the last sort of 10 years, Little Women is right up there as sort of one of my favorite films I've seen in the last 10 years. And Barbie's is just as good, maybe even better than Little Women. It's I suppose the best way we can sum it up, it's better and smarter and funnier than any movie about Barbie has any right to be. There's and it's I know there's so much hype and it's going to be memed and stuff like that, but it is absolutely worthy of the hype that it's getting. People were, this was kind of like the joke film. When we talk about when Barbieheimer first started as a phenomenon, the reason why it was being paired, other than the same opening date, was because this is the joke movie. Oppenheimer is the serious film. This is the true cinema, and then Barbie is just the wishy-washy crap that you go see as a palate cleanser. And it's not that at all. It's so good. It's so much better than it should have any right to be from a script and a filmmaking point of view, all the way up to its themes. And I don't want to go into spoilers or anything like that, but I had more existential dread in Barbie than I did the whole way through Oppenheimer. There's no there's no logical reason why that should happen, but it did.
Yeah, and I think it really hits home there, like I said, without spoilers, towards the end when she is talking to an older woman. I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about, and they're kind of having
Yeah.
it's probably the most emotional part of the film. And I was like, especially being there with my girlfriend who played with Barbies, it's like, and she watched all like the Barbie animated movies. That was kind
Yeah.
of nice to hear things like that.
Yeah, and just speaking on, well, not that particular scene, but like just the performance from Margot Robbie in general. I suppose if you're casting a Barbie movie, it makes sense to cast someone like Margot Robbie, who is, in terms of,
There couldn't have been anyone else.
yeah, in terms of like objective, like just someone who's like objectively a good looking person, like Margot Robbie's there. Like, it makes sense to cast her as Barbie. It would make no sense to cast anybody else really. Um, And from if you just went by the trailers or just had assumptions about what this movie would be, you would assume it's just Barbie acting like a bimbo for 2 hours and that's it. But she really flexes her emotional muscles here, much more than you would anticipate. In a movie where she plays a personification of a Barbie doll. She gets to really flex her emotions. And when we were going into this movie, me and Eve were just kind of just talking generally, just on the way in the car, and she was like, she said something not along the lines of, Margot Robbie's so famous, but like I don't think she's like that good. She's a good actress, but I don't think she's like that good. I've never like been wowed by her. And I was like, yeah, I kind of get that. She's been pretty good in everything I've seen, but I don't think I've ever been like wowed by her, in ways that I've been wowed by other, actors. But I was wowed by her in Barbie, and I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting to laugh and smile. I wasn't expecting to feel actual emotions by her performance. So Margot Robbie for Oscar. I'm on the train. I am on the Oscar train for Margot Robbie to be at least nominated for an Oscar for her role as Barbie, because I thought she was fantastic.
I think where Robbie's talents really lie, and it's kind of a memes like quote, not quote, but a saying, but like she's really good at understanding the tone and the assignment in a sense. Like you look at like the
Yeah,
range of stuff she's done. She knew what David Ayers wanted out of Harley Quinn, and then when somebody like James Gunn takes over, she still can keep that going to the right tone that Gunn is looking for. And then you look at Babylon, she knows what Giselle is going for. She's just
yeah,
really good at that. So when she's working with somebody like Gerwig, she gets, because I think this movie really can be bad if you don't understand the tone the film is going for.
100%.
Like, because there's not necessarily tonal shifts, but it's playing a lot with light and dark themes. Like, even if it's just for moments at a time.
Yeah, there's almost like a self-awareness as well that you have to have. Like we'll talk about Ryan Gosling's performance as Ken.
So
Ryan
good.
Gosling's he's such a serious, like, and this is another conversation I had with Neve. She was like, I thought Ryan Reynolds might be good as Ken. And I was like, yeah, I could definitely see Ryan Reynolds as Ken, but I don't think the film is as good if Ryan Reynolds as Ken, because we're used to Ryan Gosling being the serious guy, and he has had his sort of lighter roles, like Crazy Stupid Love and The Nice Guys. He's had these sort of lighter
Mhm.
roles, but he is mainly known for his kind of stoic roles, like in
The
Blade
drive.
Runner and Drive. Yeah, that's what he's known for. The literally me characters. Um
Ken is literally me though, so I know.
yeah, he is another literally me, but but he knows that there's a self-awareness there with, in terms of how his character develops in the movie into this almost like an incel. Um and they do that commentary on incel culture brilliantly. It's subtle, but it's she really Greta and Noah, they really did a great job of translating that into a Barbie world, which is, it's funny to say, but they really did a good job of translating this kind of idea of incel culture and sort of female hatred into something that makes sense in Barbie world, um, where they don't have genitals, as you'll learn in the film, so they can't be driven by testosterone. Um, but
Yeah,
as a
and oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, as I was saying, yeah, just with Ryan Gosling's performance, it's hammy and it's goofy, but like you can tell he's having the time of his life just doing this. And there's a self-awareness there where, you know, he's doing like some serious stuff in this movie, but like you can just tell that he's having so much fun playing this role. And I think he's just perfect in that, because he has that sort of that kind of fake seriousness that he usually does, with that, kind of the fact that he's just having fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think like I said, I understand. And I don't even disagree with the Ryan Reynolds thing, but I think what Gosling brings to it is, I guess, the way I think of Reynolds is kind of like a likable asshole type guy. That's his personality, like in a
Yeah.
lot of films. Where this one, as much of an asshole as like Ken is in the movie, you still feel bad for him a lot of times. Like, and, I think you get that from Gosling, just because you're like, there's depth here somewhere. Like, there's more to this than
Mm.
that's necessarily just right on the surface. And I mean, of course, it's a very, purposely on the surface. A lot of this stuff isn't hidden in any way. But I don't know. I felt like there was like a likableness even when he was going through the worst parts of it. So, when you get to the end, you're more okay with things like that.
Yeah, and I think the
More
writing has a lot to do with that, because and absolutely, I completely agree with what you said. It makes it as an audience, it makes it more believable with Gosling, because he's just, and this is not a slight to Ryan Reynolds, but Gosling is just the more talented actor. He has the range, the depth to do that. But Ryan Reynolds is good at what he does. He probably, like, Ryan Gosling probably couldn't do what Ryan Reynolds does. So they're both good at what they do.
Mhm.
Um, but I think with what we're talking about, and again, I don't want to go into spoilers or anything like that, so I'll kind of keep this as vague as possible. But when a film like Barbie comes out, you're going to have some people online who are saying it's anti-male and you know super feminist, and it's going to make all women hate men, and all this bullshit basically that you see incels write about online. And I thought the film handled this so tactfully, because yes, it shows, the Kens as these very insecure guys who feel that they deserve and warrant the love of the Barbies, and it makes them very incelly. But it's also acknowledged that, Barbie's not perfect either. She does kind of string Ken along. He has a right to be upset. Not necessarily he has the right to behave like he does, but you can understand why he's upset, and it gives room to them be redeemable when they talk about this stuff. So I thought
Because
that was
even though they're,
brilliant how they did it.
yeah, and because there's still gender roles, like, and of course in Barbie, there's very distinct gender roles. They're just different from our own world. So, and it's like there's still issues that are going to come from that type of gender role, no matter where
Mhm.
you're at, no matter what the world is. Like, every gender has something they don't like about being that gender that makes it difficult. And I mean, you can hear even non-incel men talk about like dating scenes and how difficult that can be. And of course, women have plenty to complain about, as this film explores as well. But
Absolutely,
yeah, and I
yes.
think yeah, and I mean it's one of those things where, yeah, and I think they do handle it well, in the sense that there is a coming togetherness, even if it's not like everyone's got the same issues or everyone's issues are equal. There has to still be like the sense of a working relationship, which is not, to make things better, essentially,
Yeah,
which I
there's
think is
a
great.
yeah, there's a recognition from both sides that there that there is difficulties, emotional difficulties on both sides, and something, each other have to work on things to try and find a way to sort of coexist in a happy way. But yeah, I don't want to get too much into spoilers, so I'll kind of leave it at that. But I just thought how they sort of managed those themes, because this could have been this could have been very like, and even like Neve said this to me, is like, I hope it's just not like a I hate men fest movie, because those are annoying. And this very much could have been, in the wrong hands, this could have been, a terrible movie about, hating men and stuff like that, which is not the point of this film. And, they explore the patriarchy, and it explores how women are underutilized in power, in positional powers or powers. I don't know the right phrase, but you know what I mean. Uh, Women are underutilized in positions of power, in this world, in the real world, and that's a fact that that film doesn't try and hide that fact at all. Um, but it's also not saying that you should hate all men because of that. It's about trying to find a working world that kind of works for everybody, which I think is a message that kind of suits everyone. And I'm sure you're going to still have the same right wing nut jobs, going crazy. I think Ben Shapiro already tweeted about how it's a woke nightmare or something like that. But
Oh, he's got like a 45-minute video now.
oh
It's
Christ,
45 minutes.
I
But
would
no,
not watch that.
I agree. And I think, it takes the jabs it needs to. Like we're talking about the patriarchy stuff. Like it doesn't let anyone off the hook, but it does make the point that, the average person you talk to doesn't actually understand or play any part in that. Like,
Yeah,
without spoiling too much, like Ken doesn't really understand why he can't get a job. Why it's like, well, this is a woman. Why does she have a job and I can't get one because of a silly degree? And it's like, it's not that simple. And it's not like they're, Ken even talks about, he's like, I don't even really fully understand it, because he doesn't. Like he's just
no,
a part of it, but it's not like he's doing anything malicious prior to that.
yeah,
Like he goes
exactly.
into the real world and he's not doing anything malicious on purpose. It's just how
Yeah.
things are, and he benefits from it.
That's a great scene where he's like, can I run this company? But and the guy's like, no, most people here have master's degrees. And it's like, but I'm a man. It's like, that doesn't really matter, So that
And
is
when he
funny.
talks to the female doctor, like that's such
Yeah,
a great scene too, which is in the trailer, so I don't feel too spoilery. But he's like,
no,
but can I talk to a doctor? I am a doctor.
yeah, exactly. It's just these sort of subtle things, and as you said, you know, yes, he's a man, so he is technically part of the patriarchy, but like you can like he's having trouble himself, so just having a penis doesn't always cut it. Not that Ken has a penis, as we all know, he has
Right.
a tan,
Metaphorically, he has
a,
one.
a metaphorical penis, precisely.
Yeah.
Um, any final thoughts on Barbie before we wrap this thing up?
No, but I will say, as a event as a whole, I am really going to dread all these studios trying to capitalize, trying to make this a thing again,
Yes,
because it's
absolutely.
going to be bad.
Yeah, this is just one of those moments where they just captured light in a bottle. I think
Yeah.
you just kind of have to wait for it to happen organically. If you try and force this, people are gonna know what you're doing. Like next summer, if someone decides to launch a fucking My Little Pony movie on the same day that Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2 comes out, and everyone's talking about we're gonna go see My Little Impossible Mission or some shit, people are just gonna see through that, so just so immediately that it's not even gonna be worth it. So yes, I also hope that they that studios don't try and replicate this. Just let it happen organically. Let the people decide. The people decided Barbieheimer was a thing, so let the people decide when the next thing happens. Let the memes decide. When
Most
this.
of the time, memes don't make money. I mean, you look at, like, before really the internet was big, but you look at Snakes on a Plane. Everyone joked about that movie. Nobody saw it. Nobody went to the theaters to see it. Or Morbius. That was a huge
Morbius.
meme.
That's the
It
perfect
bombed
example.
twice.
They brought it back because of the
Twice.
memes. They thought people were like, oh, there's so many Morbin time memes. Let's bring it back. Everybody will want to go see it, and then nobody saw it. So, you know,
Yeah,
uh,
memes don't equal money. This just the
yep,
time it did.
the people still hold the power. I think is the
Yeah.
thing to take away. The people still hold the power here. We still decide if we want to commit to something. I suppose it'd probably be weird if we're talking about two films we saw today. Probably be weird if we didn't end the episode if we wanted to say which one we preferred. Are you willing to put your name to one of these movies?
Yes, it's Oppenheimer. But I
Ooh,
like Barbie a lot, but I preferred Oppenheimer.
that's yeah, I can understand. Like I rated both of them the same on Letterboxd. They're both 4.5 movies for me. So for me, the criteria essentially comes down to which film would I rather watch again tomorrow? And the answer is Barbie. So Barbie's going to win just purely on the fact that if I was to go to the theater tomorrow and I had to watch one of them again, I'm watching Barbie. Sorry. But I loved
I mean, you'll
Oppenheimer.
feel
They
better
both got
about
the
yourself
same.
when you leave.
Well, you say that, but I don't know
Yeah.
if that's actually true. Uh, well, look, we're gonna wrap up. Thanks for anyone who kind of joined in for this random one-off episode about new movies. This is definitely the first time have conversed about new movies in the same way we do our normal format. Maybe we'll try and do it again. I don't get to the theater as much as Zach does, and Chris definitely doesn't get to the theater as much as any of us do. So that's the only reason why we don't do this more regularly. But we'll see next time there's like a big film out, and if me and Zach both happen to see it kind of opening weekend, maybe we'll try and do something like this again. It was fun to talk about a film that's so fresh in my brain. I just sat down in the theater in. I don't often get the opportunity to do that. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate Zach for taking time out of his busy Saturday afternoon to talk to me about them.
And I appreciate that. And I had a blast too. Like as far as like a meme thing go, this is the best case scenario we could have got with how this started. So it's great to have two good movies here.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're not here shitting on one of these films because it's always easier to talk about a film that you love as opposed to talking about a film that you hate.